o'clock. It's called to order. Certification and compliance with open meeting laws. Danny just came in,
Must be open.
so doors open. Roll call. You wanna read them off, Dan, or you want me to do it? Do you need a piece of paper?
I'm good.
You just clever.
Why don't you read them off it?
Okay, Miller, here. Radecki,
Here.
Kostopoulos, Hefkin,
Here.
Mitchell.
Here.
New business, discuss and take, well, before we get to new business, I was gonna make a little speech here, but there's nobody here to speech to. So, if anybody comes in, we're going to do this in an orderly fashion tonight. It'll be raise your hand, identify yourself, and then you'll be able to speak. Anybody will be able to speak, but they will with rules. If they have to be reminded twice, they will be asked to leave. With that being said, this meeting was set up because this was when Jörg was supposed to be here. He set up the date, and then he can't make it. So I appreciate Hal and Levi coming, and I want to get this done tonight. We took a few things out, and one of the things that I've received are emails with faulty information. We never planned to fine anybody for something that was not in our jurisdiction. What we were talking about fines for was housekeeping in general, keeping up the looks of the airport and stuff like that. We weren't talking about air violations. That's beyond our domain. So we took all the fines out. There will be none. And I think that if somebody doesn't have the common sense to keep the grounds clean and orderly when everybody else is trying to do so, I think we'll just have to speak to them, and I don't know what we can do, try to shame them into cleaning up their act.
We're gonna have to renew their lease.
And that'd be an expensive proposition when they have a $40,000 hanger.
Sure would.
That'd be fine with me. If it's a continued repeat violator. If it's somebody that has a hanger and they're not here, they should make arrangements to have the work done. With that being said, we're gonna start from the beginning and just go through it. If there's any questions, again, raise your hand and identify yourself. And if there's something that Hal or Levi has, just raise your hand, whatever. This document provides operating rules for the town of Palmyra, Wisconsin Municipal Airport, 88C. It is written to provide guidance for all airport users, including based aircraft owners and operators, hangar owners and tenants, transient aircraft and visitors. This
How about if they give them copies of it?
Oh,
I got one. Somebody emailed me a copy, so I printed it.
okay. Yeah, I gave one to Elaine
No,
already.
you don't.
You made copies, they nobody showed up, huh?
Thank you.
I was kinda saving them for the pilots, Jim, but see us all running here.
All right.
It looks like one is wearing an EAA hat, so.
That's my next door neighbor.
Okay, this document will, number one, identify safety hazards. Number two, promote orderly operations at 88C. Number three, not 34. Address conflict resolution. 4, mitigate risks, and 5, provide guidelines for standardized procedures for all airport users. Number 2, applicability and compliance, all air and ground aviation related operations, as well as non-aviation parties must be in compliance with this document unless a written waiver to specific parts has been granted by the airport manager or designee. Necessity for operating rules. Operating rules are designed to establish uniform, safe operating practices for the town of Palmyra Municipal Airport. Its purpose is not to replace or to conflict with any FAA document or establish safe operating practice. Conformity with federal, state, and local rules, regulations, and ordinances. The operation of all aircraft and air vehicles must comply with Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, commonly referred to as Federal Aviation Regulation, FARS. The Aeronautical Information Manual, FAA Advisory Circulars, Advisory Directives, Notices to Airmen, FAA Chart Supplement, and FAA Orders. All users of 88C are expected to comply with the applicable federal, state, town, and town rules.
Should be S in there,
Yes,
okay, town rules.
that's the end of it, just town rules.
Yeah.
Federal, state, and town rules, okay. Regulations, laws, and ordinances while on, near, or over the airport. If parts of this document appear to conflict with federal, state, or local regulations, the most restrictive interpretation of rules and procedures shall prevail.
Any comment on that?
Listen,
I'm not sure if we can be more restrictive than the local stuff.
we are the local stuff.
No, I mean, the federal or state, we can't be more restrictive than that. If I'm not mistaken. I thought I asked the attorney that last time, to check into that one.
It says the most restrictive. not-
Yeah, we can't be more restrictive than they are. We
No,
can
it
al-
says most restrictive.
Okay, so we could be equal to or,
Lesser than.
so when you say if our rules are more restrictive than the
No,
town.
the most restrictive interpretation. So if the federal rules are the most well, yeah, we could, ours can't be more restrictive than
Theirs.
theirs.
Alright, you wanna strike that out?
And they're not.
But rewrite it like Peggy was kinda saying it, that our rules, some of our rules can't be more restrictive than any of the other governing bodies, but we can go to the most restrictive government. Let's say the federal government doesn't care what we do. Then the town says no night flying, then we can go with no night flying. But we can't make that rule on our own.
Yeah, I'd actually prefer us to strike it after local regulations.
That whole last sentence.
Right, I would.
If parts of this
Period,
document,
and local regulations, period.
no, cause that won't make sense.
I wanna see.
We'd strike that whole last sentence. All users of 88C are expected to comply with applicable federal,
That's fine.
state, and town rules, regulations, laws, and ordinances while on, near, or over the airport.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And again, stairs,
Does that meet with your approval, Al?
Yeah, I'm not approving this though.
No, but,
Yeah, but it sounds fine to me.
I don't mean to put you on the spot when I say that.
So does that also mean that if the town says, or the village says that no purple airplanes can fly into Palmyra, then they make a law and,
Yeah, we couldn't have any purple ones here then.
We're mainly thinking about white ones, but.
yeah. Well, that's true, that's a good case in point, that if you're leaving some of the governing body, some of the operation at the airport to non-aviation, not FA stuff, and it's, you know, you can't fly past 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or, you know, or something like that, it's,
But that's a local ordinance, and we can't
But then
go
it'd be a,
against the
yeah, a
rules.
local ordinance, it would be more restrictive than the state law. So
But then that would
you
come
can't
in
do that.
those ordinances where they have gotten into noise ordinances and lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of case law that's been said in regard to that stuff. if a village or they tried some crazy thing, then,
I know, but we still can't go against what they say, though. We can if we wanna go to
But-
court fighter.
The village can't make ordinances to restrict the airport. Chapter 114 says that.
Right, that's
So,
okay,
yeah,
yeah.
so the town can't either.
So town can't either. So that, okay, that's different than a noise ordinance. You know, if they tried to make a, like you said, can't fly after 2 o'clock, they can't do it. A noise ordinance would be something completely different. And that they would have to probably prove their case in a court deal. I don't see,
But regardless, we still can't go against what they say. It's kinda like,
no, it's
we
kinda
can't
like
serve
saying,
18-year-old kids beer out here, because that's against state law.
right,
well, there's stuff they regulate, like a building permit, you need building permit to build a hangar.
You do, yeah, we
You know,
can't change
there's-
that.
There's,
right, but they can't make us get a conditional use permit.
That I don't know about,
No, they
you
can't.
know.
but there's, at this point, I don't think we ought to worry about it, I don't think the village is gonna mess with the airport.
No, I'm not worried about that, I'm worried about us coming up with rules that are more stringent than the local ones, and people saying, no, you can't do that because the local ordinances say we can do it.
Is it fair to say, John, that you wanna keep the ability for the town to make additional rules?
Well, they can't make rules for the airport, like,
Like they'll only allow up to 180 horse airplanes.
they can't do that, because that's restricting the airport. They're not allowed to do that. But we couldn't say we only allow 180 horsepower planes here, because nobody else says we can't, and the FAA doesn't say we can't have them here either. So that's what I'm saying, is we can't be more
That's gonna
restricted
come
than they
up,
already are.
that's gonna come up when we talk about, the elevated altitude also.
The pattern altitude?
Yeah,
Well, all right, we'll wait until we get to that part, but,
because that'll come up in that discussion, and I know
Okay.
there's gonna be discussion about it.
all right.
See, some of that stuff you're addressing it is, it's covered in that, obligated airport stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there are obligations there that we do have to meet as an airport. You know, so when, say an outsider tries to make some kind of rule restricting something, then you have to start looking into that other legal end of it. The part.
Right, but
As far as
Listen,
our obligations.
what I'm making here is, we aren't a governing body that can write up rules and regulations that are more stringent than the local or the state or the federal governments.
Right,
We can't.
So that's why we can't have that clause in it that says whichever is most stringent, because if our rules are more stringent.
we took that out.
Right, that's, and I thought we were supposed to talk about that.
No.
Leave that out, and
It's
we're
out,
fine.
it's gone,
Let's go on to the next one then.
thank you. Exemptions, airport maintenance personnel, police, fire, EMT, and other emergency services are exempt from this document while providing official services at this airport. Rules may be modified on a temporary basis to accommodate anyone experiencing medical emergencies or for persons with disabilities. Aircraft and air vehicles operating under emergency conditions may deviate from this document to the extent necessary. Grievance procedure. Any party that considers any airport use limitations restrictive beyond reason or in its conflict with federal or state regulations may petition the Town of Palmyra Airport Commission for relief. If the commission fails to agree with the petitioner, recourse lies with the FAA, state of Wisconsin, or court system as appropriate. Parties may agree to mediation or binding arbitration as an alternative to the court system. I don't think we're gonna have anything in this document that we're doing that's gonna put anybody in court.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
This is just general operating rules, it's mostly common sense. I think that is fine the way it's written. Agreed?
Yeah, I'm good.
So far.
Okay, we're not gonna spend a half hour on this, on number 7, but we have to deal with it. Air operations and traffic pattern. Guidance for this section is from Advisory Circular AC 90-66B, Fire Part 91, and currently published airport traffic pattern for 88C. Traffic pattern altitude of 1,000 is currently published in the Airport Guide and other publications. Pilots are expected to be familiar with this AC 90-66B as amended and to be in compliance with this and any other applicable ACs, regulations, notices to airmen, chart supplement publication, and temporary flight restrictions while operating at 88C. Traffic pattern for 27 is left-hand pattern, 1,000 feet above ground level. Traffic pattern for 09 is left-hand pattern, 1,000 feet above ground level. Glider make the initial entry into traffic pattern at 1,000 feet AGL. Traffic pattern for runway 27, left-hand pattern. Traffic pattern for 09 is left-hand pattern. Air vehicles operating under FAR Part 103, traffic pattern for runway 27 is left-hand pattern, 500 feet above ground level. Traffic pattern for runway 09 is left-hand pattern, 500 feet above ground level. Traffic pattern for a helicopter, traffic pattern for runway 27 is left-hand pattern, 1,000 feet above ground level. Traffic pattern for 09 is left-hand pattern, 1,000 feet above ground level. The runway pattern may be on the opposite side of the runway from fixed wing traffic only when airspeed requires it or for practice power-off landings. And if local policy permits, landings not on the runway must avoid the flow of fixed wing traffic. 88C allows right-hand pattern for helicopters under the preceding conditions. The runway is for takeoff and landing purposes only. Minimum use of the runway for aircraft ground operations, including maintenance checks, is allowed, as are aircraft flight training operations. However, any aircraft using the runway for such purposes must monitor local traffic and give right-of-way to aircraft taking off or landing. Aircraft executing ground or training operations must exit the runway immediately to give way to other traffic. Aircraft or other vehicles shall not occupy the runway in a manner that impedes other aircraft from takeoff or landing. All takeoffs and landings are to be conducted on established runways. No takeoffs or landings are permitted on any port of the taxiways, areas adjacent to the runway access road, or any other airport surface except by helicopters. No operator, pilot, or other personnel will impede the operation of any aircraft or block or restrict any access to any taxiway, runway, fuel pump, or hangar. Okay, it's been brought up in other meetings that 1,000 feet is too high for some of the aircraft we have.
Oh, I didn't hear about that. It's too high.
That's
What,
been-
what aircraft would that be?
I don't know, people were saying that the 800 feet was because that's what had been used.
Yeah, for 40 years, but 1,000 foot is standard, and I think it should be as printed.
1,000 feet, right?
Mhm.
How about you, Lou?
I'm good with that. The person who brought that up was a person flying like you, a very low horsepower airplane
Well, I'm fine
in
with
the
1,000.
summertime,
Mhm.
so.
So I'd
When
go
I
with the way
check
it is.
around, we were published in some non-FAA publications as 1,000 feet. The chart supplement was blank, and it was pointed out to me that blank means that it's 1,000 feet by default.
Right.
So in fact, it has been 1,000 feet. The only place I've seen the 800 feet is in the flyer that's maybe decades old in the clubhouse. It does say 800 feet. Other than that, I've not
It
really
used to
seen
be
it.
some of the other public stuff though, like Sky Vector or Ab Air or some of those.
I looked, I didn't see it.
Well,
but it
maybe
might
5
be
years
there.
ago. You know, not ancient time ago, but a while ago.
I didn't find anything that was 800
But-
feet,
1,000 feet, in my opinion, is safer.
and it's fine.
You know,
It gives extra noise protection over the
it's
city.
worse for the people that are training over there. That might already get 200 more feet, but that's the way it is.
Well, and more importantly, I think it's consistent.
Yeah, with all the other airports, yeah.
There are others that have 800-foot patterns.
There's ones with lower too, but that's,
Right. But they're published as such.
yeah. I think leave it at 1,000 and don't worry about people that are pissing and blowing about it.
I agree with that.
I agree.
Okay.
All right, if it's open for discussion, I do have a
Raise your
request.
hand, you gotta raise your
Richard Martin, Palmyra, Wisconsin. Under that section, they're talking about air vehicles operating FAR Part 103. I respectfully request that runway 27 be a right-hand pattern. Otherwise, you're basically eliminating Part 103 aircraft from using runway 27, which would almost force us to have to make upwind landings, and that provides a unsafe condition. There's really no reason why it can't be a right-hand pattern. We're already 500 feet below the standard traffic pattern. We have excellent visibility, whereas a lot of certified aircraft have limited visibility in all areas. I think that that is a reasonable request, and it would provide for safer operation.
Comments from anybody?
I agree.
Well, what I do see here though is, if we're telling Part 103's left-hand turn, we're asking them to do something that's illegal. Because there's no way that a 103 aircraft can fly and land on runway 27 with left-hand pattern legally.
I
They're
agree.
too close to the houses, or what they call congested areas.
We've gone through this before with the issue of facing traffic, and I don't think you'll ever find, nor have I found, an instance where there's precedent for that.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm thinking is this though. We might be able to talk to the FAA for a waiver, and maybe it'd be a waiver that has to be, you have to call ahead of time before you're gonna fly and make it effective for those days.
That may be fine for now, or for later. For right now, there's no way we can go through that process.
Right, no, we can't, so that, I put a little note here that
If you wanna bring that up in the
we might
future,
have to
that'd be
hold
fine.
that.
No, we can't hold it, we'll publish it, but we could change it.
But here we're still telling we have to do something that's illegal though.
Correct?
No, we're not.
Okay, well, you're already allowing for right-hand traffic pattern with helicopters. So Lou, why is that any different?
That verbiage is right out of AC.
Yeah.
Right,
The AC.
so you got opposing traffic there. How is that any different?
Well, there's precedent for it.
And that is,
It's published.
but I know, but
It's
what
published.
is the precedent?
I'm not a helicopter guy, it's a published normal procedure.
Okay.
It may be a better question for,
Are you a Part 103 pilot?
I am not,
All right, so you're not experienced with that either.
no, I'm not.
All right, so then I would, again, request out of safety that we make runway 27 a right-hand pattern. To my knowledge, there is other airports that have right-hand patterns for ultralight. If you want, I can present them in writing.
That'd be fine. They actually are situations where they have parallel runways, Rick, so that's what you're looking for.
No, still using the same runway that general aviation
Right.
uses.
Okay, any comment from Al or Lee?
I guess, so I make these comments as the state, and I have no jurisdiction over federal aviation regulations. I don't interpret them. So it's my understanding that to the hang gliders, ultralight pilots, the concern with why you would want the right traffic is just because you don't wanna fly over the houses.
We can't fly over homes.
If you knew you could, would you still have the same concerns?
No, if we could, no, that would be fine, but the FAA regulations for Part 103 say no
Say-
flight over,
Congested areas.
yeah.
So, in my discussions with FAA, there is no case where an ultralight or pilot has ever been found guilty of violating just the Part 103 that says you can't fly over congested areas. And so, they won't recommend what kind of traffic pattern you use here, but knowing this specific situation, they have time and again gone back to what it says in the advisory circular as their preferred traffic, or is the best practice for traffic patterns at all airports, and that would include Palmyra. So I don't know that there is a process to get a waiver
There is, because I've been
Well,
in
there is for like
waivers for.
air shows and stuff. I
No,
don't
no,
know how
for
that
other
works,
things, for going over 18,000
Sure.
feet and a bunch of other things.
but I don't know how the FAA would handle that here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so what the FISDO, I talked to the FISDO this morning, they've looked through all their cases in their database, and, they were unable to find any sort of court case or anything that had to do with how FAA interprets that specific rule. They can't tell me what the interpretation is, because the only way an FAA rule becomes interpreted, is if it goes to court and the courts decide how that rule is interpreted. So right now, the guys at the FISDO are telling me they can give you opinions, we can all share our own interpretations of what we think that rule means, but the actuality is that rule has never been tested. So I don't know where that leaves you guys, but I think that's, certainly in my mind, that's something to consider as you're thinking about this.
What has been the pattern here forever?
Left hand.
Left hand.
And it's been left hand for part 103 the whole time.
Yeah, well, it's never really been addressed on part 103. I've been flying right-hand pattern for 2.7 for years, because it's never been addressed.
Well, actually, it has been addressed. It's always been in the advisory circular and the FAR, so.
But nobody
That's
brought
not,
it
that's
up
not really a
here.
fair statement.
Well, you show me where there's a statement though for Palmyra Airport of 800 feet regulation.
And there's not, that's why we're going to 1,000. We're trying to
What,
straighten some
but
of
the,
these
the
things
point
out.
I'm trying to make, Lou, is that there is no real established part 103 flight pattern for this airport until now.
Well, no, that's not correct. There's always been an established 103. Because it's always been in the regulations and always been in the advisory circular.
Well, again, I go back to other airports that are using right-hand patterns for ultralight.
There's a process for changing that. So what I see as an issue, if I was a non-radio aircraft flying over the top and I see an aircraft going, and I can't tell what you are from above, and flying a right-hand pattern, that's really subject to misinterpretation by me. So the left-hand pattern is standard, and if what Levi is saying has merit, then go with what he says, or at some point, we'll go through the process of changing it. We can't and will not change it tonight.
Well, I think you have the power to do that tonight, but evidently you are against part 103 operating on runway 27 without us violating an established FAA rule or have to land upwind.
Okay.
That's what you're doing.
No, we're just being in compliance, Rick. There's nothing against.
I disagree with you a little bit.
All right.
One other question in that same area. Can you please identify what, on the next page where it says, "and if local policy permits"? I've read through that several times and I don't quite understand what that statement means.
What paragraph, what page and paragraph?
That's the helicopter section.
Yeah. And, you know, and it says here about the helicopter landing, when airspeed requires it. I'm not sure what an example of that would be.
Levi, help you have insight into that? I'm not a helicopter guy either. I really just took that verbatim from you. I thought it was a good guideline because I didn't know what I was talking about.
All I know about helicopters is they prefer opposite traffic to fixed wing. It helps them see better, helicopters can stop, we can't. Any type of fixed wing, you can't just stop moving, they can't. That's all I know.
Yeah, and again, you're calling out that their normal pattern is left-hand, and again, typically it is right-hand pattern for helicopter. But you're making an exception that in some cases, when airspeed requires it, or for practice of auto rotation landings.
Would you feel better if that paragraph about helicopters was just removed and let the advisory circular stand and regulations?
I'm not qualified to answer that, I don't
Well,
know.
that's fairly simple.
How many helicopters land here?
Yeah, there's one based here and
There's
there's
one
one
there,
there.
Oh, yeah, we've had a National Guard. We've had-
And I've got a couple now, so.
But the thing is,
Yeah,
though,
so there's a few.
Lou is taking this right from the FAA, and that's, I'm sure that's the patterns that helicopters
It's
use normally.
That's verbatim from the
Right,
advisory.
and so I don't see anything wrong with keeping that in there the way it is. And that really doesn't have anything to do with the FAR 103s, Part 103s, because that's standard practice for helicopters, not for 103s.
Right.
So I say leave that in there, since you've got right out of the FAA documents, leave it in there that way, leave it alone. Back to the 103 stuff. When can we change it if we decide to change it?
Change it anytime you put the process in order.
Yeah.
And we can come back and amend
Put it,
anything.
put it in there the way you have it for now, and then we'll have to figure out something later on if it becomes much of a problem.
I have no issue going through the process to change it. I think.
Well,
I think
I'd
we
like to
need
check into the stuff on waivers though, so then they still could go left
I
handed.
would like to do that, to change it with somebody from the FAA here, present, telling us, giving us guidance.
To do the right hand,
But if, but
To
if,
do
but
whatever.
if they're not gonna give guidance, I mean, we have FAA people here. We
No,
have.
there'll
Either
be a
way.
way.
Yeah,
There'll be
either
a way.
The FAA will not comment on your rules. It will not review them. That's what I was told this
But
morning.
there are publications that have to be notified that
Right.
the Tahedron out here,
They don't,
runway alignment indicator needs to be changed or modified, so there's an expense in the process to change traffic patterns.
So if, okay, let me get this straight though, if the FAA will not tell us what we should do,
the FISDO won't at least, yeah.
okay, they won't tell us what we should do. If somebody has a violation, who's gonna enforce it? Nobody, nobody. So if Rick comes in and flies with a right-hand pattern like he's done numerous times, like he said, unless he hits somebody or something, who's ever gonna say anything or do anything?
The FAA won't.
The nature of aviation in itself, right?
So, I understand Rick's position, I understand Lou's position, but the position we should be taking is what we can do and what we cannot do. And if Rick wants to fly right-hand pattern, and there's nobody to stop him from doing it, other than a piece of paper that says he should, which, you know, he could take that across the road and use it for toilet paper.
Based on my conversation with FAA, you guys put yourself in the best position if you align your rules with what FAA has published as best practices in their advisory circular.
Okay,
Because
we
if
leave it-
something happens,
happens,
then you can fall on, well, this, we're just doing what FAA recommended in their advisory circular, and if somebody wasn't following that, then that obviously puts them in a worse position than what, you know, you guys, what the town and the airport's doing.
So the way you have it written is the best way to stay in compliance.
David?
Dunn, Elmira. So basically what you're saying is that by following the AC circulars and the FAA's recommended guidelines, the liability falls with the operator and not the airport commissioner or the airport.
You would
More so.
think, that's, I would, you know,
More or
just
less.
more or less, that
More so,
would be
right.
for the courts, you know, to decide, but, if you're just asking me, that's what it
Right.
seems like.
All right, if it ever loads, I just found the link here, and it says FAA Part 103 does, there is a variation from the normal left-hand pattern. The connection's here, so it's very slow at loading, but it's AC 103-6.
Actually, you can't go over, period. And that's not suggested, that's something else. That's persons in there or something, or assembly of persons. Yeah, because where his house is and where these houses are, that's not 1,000 feet from the taxi road. We have a high slice of it, so left-hand pattern would be illegal. But no more illegal than right, turn away.
ASC 103-6, Rick, is about 30 pages.
And I'm downloading, it's 56%.
Right. Can we move on?
Yeah.
You got it here?
Yeah, but I'm in sections.
We could revisit this. Did anybody have anything else in the rest of that block? Okay, equipment. No wheeled units, dollies, skids, or other equipment used for launches, takeoffs, or landings are allowed on any portion of the runway, parallel taxiway, area between the runway and parallel taxiway, or areas adjacent to the runway. Exemption is made only for equipment used for the takeoff or landing of float-equipped aircraft, gliders, air vehicles, or ski-equipped aircraft when the operation is for the purpose of one seasonal takeoff or landing. If used, such equipment must be immediately removed from the runway, parallel taxiway, area between the runway and parallel taxiway, or areas adjacent to the runway. Such equipment is to be removed to the area south and well clear of the parallel taxiway, and then stowed or stored as specified in paragraph 20 of this document.
Question I have, I'm Danny. The part that says when the operation is for the purpose of one seasonal takeoff or landing, does that just apply for the ski-equipped aircraft or all those exceptional things or exemptions? I'm just confused.
Again, Lou, did that come out of the circular, or is
No,
that?
that came out of the,
Well, it looks like, to me like it applies to the float planes. Gliders, I don't see where they're that's fully seasonal though.
You're thinking of like a ski,
Well, cause I know some guys in their skis, they have those dollies they put on the taxi out, and then they take them off, a lot of them, they still right into the airplane.
right.
But I don't consider that.
This was in there to avoid clutter and danger from clutter on the
Yeah, leave
on the
junk
runway
out there,
surface.
yeah.
So, if you wanted to say, and take out the seasonal takeoff or landing, that'd be fine, would that cover it?
yeah, I'd be good with that.
Okay.
Yeah, we just remove one, huh?
That whole end of the sentence. When the operation from there should, a period after aircraft.
Got it.
Anything else on this one? David?
Yeah, David Dunn, where's paragraph 20? I'm sorry, I'm looking and I can't find it.
I was doing the same thing.
Okay, I thought maybe I was missing.
Was there a
something.
reference to paragraph 27?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there is, and that's, I was
I had to
looking.
renumber because we took out 2 paragraphs because of popular opinion in its
Okay.
entirety, and when I
Okay,
renumbered it.
that's fine, I just thought maybe I was missing a couple pages or something, because I stopped at 18, so,
So that would
Okay.
be 18.
Yeah, thank you.
no worries.
Good spot.
Not nitpicking, just,
Oh, no, that's good, that's
Look at
why that's why we're here.
And now that you've identified yourself once, you don't have to do it.
okay, okay.
Elaine's the only one that has to. do it.
No, it should be going because it's a point out.
Okay,
Can I ask a question?
yes, you can.
Clarify. So no dollies, no skids, no wheeled units on the runway? Is that where you guys settled? Or can they be used if they're removed
They have
immediately?
to be removed immediately, it's the intent.
Okay.
So I guess the question is, why would we have that first paragraph? Because you're at the top saying that you don't want any of that stuff, parallel
There should be-
taxiways, and
There
then,
should be allowed to be left on,
right,
will not be allowed to be left on the runway.
because that's really the goal that you're
I
talking
mean,
about.
that's what you're trying to get at, I believe.
Yeah,
Allowed to be left on and then just leave it at that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, tractors, golf carts, scooters, motorcycles, and wheeled vehicles are prohibited from any portion of the runway, parallel taxiway, area between runway and parallel taxiway, or areas adjacent to the runway. Exemption is made for hangar owners to gain access to their hangars or fuel area, and for the retrieval of disabled aircraft or disabled air vehicles. No vehicles, aircraft, air vehicles, apparatus, or equipment of any kind are permitted north of the runway, as this is leased farmland. Vehicles operating on the runway must be equipped with and use flashing amber lights. They should also be equipped with radios to be aware of aircraft operations. Emergency vehicles shall use appropriate lighting.
Is that, I'm sorry,
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
does that allow us to use a lighted radio golf cart to fetch tow dollies, launch dollies?
Yeah, because if they're gonna have the dolly, they have to fetch it, and the fastest way is to send something out there to fetch it, as
Yeah.
opposed to,
I'd suggest that, yeah, that's good.
Well, on the lighting on the vehicles on the runways and taxiways, aren't there FAA rules that describe how they're supposed to be illuminated, the vehicles out in those areas?
There are recommendations.
Or recommendations, okay.
All, an advisory circular for you guys, for an airport like Palmyra, at the end of the day, that's just recommendations, those are not regulatory.
Oh, okay, okay.
so at the Danny's point though, we really shouldn't exclude, you're gonna have to have something to retrieve those things, it'd be faster to retrieve it than walking out there.
Well, I'd rather have a vehicle with a light and a radio than a person.
How long does it take you to get it off the runway with a cart?
Depends on if he has to walk or he can ride his golf cart out there.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Sorry.
But if you have to walk, that's a long way to go 1,000 feet.
Couple hundred feet, yeah.
Okay.
But it can be pulled off perpendicular to the runway, so they're only gonna move it 200 feet max. Because we can't go to the north, they have to move it to the south.
Right.
What happens if
Taxi
you
on
start
back.
from the beginning, the guy has to go all the way to the,
Right, no, I know what you mean there, but I mean, once you get to it, it's
right.
200 feet.
When they had that tournament here, it was a matter of seconds, and there were a lot of hang gliders, there were like 80 of them.
Yeah,
And they had those dollies off of the runway, and God, I'd probably need 20, 30 seconds.
But to Danny's point, that if you're excluding the use of something, even if to get it off of there, I mean, you have conflicting parts there. The exemption, do you wanna exclude those? I mean, or is that part of the operation of the,
Okay, you could put in here, exemptions could be made by permission of airport manager, something to that effect.
well, what happens if somebody's based here and they're gonna do glider operations, they have to get permission every time they're gonna do that?
The reason for this paragraph was to avoid confusion that I've run into several times. When you come to an airport and you see from above helter-skelter vehicles running around, and you absolutely have really no idea what the heck's going on. So an airport is for takeoff and landing of aircraft. Now, it's not primarily for all the ancillary vehicles that might be required for certain operations. So I'm opposed to making any significant changes to this, or to have a lot of golf carts and equipment hanging around the airport or near the runway. I think it's unsafe, I think it's unsightly, and I think it
What are
leads to
you
a lot of
talking, Danny,
confusion.
one golf cart?
I can't see the use for much more than that.
Where are you gonna keep the golf cart?
In my hangar.
Your hangar? I understand what a lot of this purpose is, and we haven't addressed it, it's the elephant in the room, and that's why we're doing this, basically. So we can't, according to what I've been told, we can't just exclude the hang gliders.
But you wouldn't use scooters or motorcycles or something like that, so if you said something to the effect that if that golf cart was used for the retrieval purposes of the dolly, it's for the operation of that.
I could see that's why I said something with permission of the airport manager,
Yeah, but again, you don't wanna do that daily, that's.
not daily.
do it once a year, or,
Once a year, get a permit,
yeah, but it doesn't say that, now you're adding another workload on, cause, you know.
But here though, here we have, it says exemption is made only for equipment used for takeoff and landing, and then don't worry about the rest of it. If we put that down here as part of the exemption for, maybe we could just call it dolly retrieval vehicle, in case they change from a golf cart to an ATV or something,
No,
just call it a retrieval vehicle.
just by, it says, and for the retrieval of disabled aircraft or disabled air vehicles. Just add or launch dollies.
You know, or we could just call it equipment used for launching, because in case the name changes, what do you use skis instead of dolly in the wintertime or something? Just give the generic name of the equipment, you know, equipment used for launching.
Launch equipment,
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't
just a
know.
couple words added there. I think
Covers an awful lot.
Now where it says other, it's gonna have to be on other vehicles.
No, I understand exactly where.
Now, let's see.
I think what he was talking about was for retrieval of disabled aircraft or disabled vehicles and launch equipment.
Yes.
Yeah, what was that one?
Right in the middle of the paragraph.